The Leonardo da Vinci phenomenon, a multidisciplinary analysis of the life, work, and legacy of the Renaissance polymath. The trajectory of Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci, 1452 to 1519, represents not merely the biography of an artist, but the very manifestation of the spirit of the High Renaissance. As a polymath, Da Vinci transcended conventional professional categorization, working as a painter, scientist, engineer, anatomist, sculptor, and architect. His life was guided by relentless curiosity, which he used to deconstruct the mysteries of nature, transforming empirical observation into the central pillar of all human knowledge. This report analyzes the various facets of this genius, from his technical training in Florence to his death in France, detailing his aesthetic innovations, scientific discoveries, and the lasting impact of his philosophy of life. Genesis and formation, the context of Vinci and the Bottega of Verrocchio. Leonardo's birth on April 15, 1452, in Anciano, near Vinci, occurred within a social context that would shape his independent character. The illegitimate son of the notary Ser Piero da Vinci and Caterina Lippi, an orphan peasant woman, Leonardo was deprived of a formal classical education in Latin and law, which would later lead him to describe himself as an homo senza lettere, man without letters. This educational disadvantage, ironically, became his greatest asset, as it forced him to seek truth through direct experience and systematic observation rather than relying dogmatically on ancient texts. At the age of 14, Leonardo moved to Florence, the cultural epicenter of the time, to enter as an apprentice in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio. The Bottega of Verrocchio was a laboratory of innovation where the young Da Vinci learned not only painting and sculpture but also metallurgy and mechanics. By the age of 20, his mastery was already so evident that he was admitted to the Florentine Painters Guild, although he continued to collaborate with his master. It is during this phase that the first traits of his revolutionary style began to emerge, marked by a sensitivity to light and a technique of representing nature that surpassed that of his contemporaries. Throughout his life, Leonardo da Vinci went through different phases marked by geographical changes, intellectual maturation, and the expansion of his activities. His youth, between 1452 and 1466, unfolded in Vinci and Anciano, a period during which he devoted himself mainly to observing nature and producing his first drawings, an experience fundamental to the development of his scientific and artistic vision. Between 1466 and 1482, during his formative phase in Florence, Leonardo refined his skills in Andrea del Verrocchio's workshop, where he learned painting, sculpture, and mechanical techniques, in addition to joining the Painters Guild, thereby officially establishing himself as an artist. The first phase of maturity, between 1482 and 1499, took place in Milan when Leonardo entered the service of Ludovico Sforza. During this period, he distinguished himself both in military engineering and artistic production, being responsible for innovative technical projects and for the execution of The Last Supper. Between 1500 and 1513, in his second phase of maturity, he moved between Florence, Venice, and Milan, a time when he painted the MonaLisa and carried out intensive anatomical studies. Finally, between 1513 and 1519, he lived his final phase between Rome and France, serving the Pope and later King Francis I, dedicating himself primarily to organizing his codices and systematizing his intellectual legacy. The Sforza period in Milan, the science of war and faith. In 1482, Leonardo sought new horizons in Milan, offering his services to Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan. His letter of presentation to Sforza is a landmark in the history of engineering, in which he described himself primarily as an architect and military engineer, capable of building portable bridges, innovative cannons, and armored vehicles. Although many of these inventions were theoretical, they demonstrated an advanced understanding of mechanics and physics that would be explored in his notebooks over decades. During his stay in Milan, Leonardo worked on monumental projects, such as the Sforza horse, an equestrian bronze statue that was never completed, and the mural masterpiece The Last Supper. It was during this period that his integration of art and science reached its peak, using geometry to compose scenes of profound emotional and psychological intensity. The Last Supper, technical innovation and material fragility. Painted between 1495 and 1498 in the refectory of Santa Maria del Grazie, The Last Supper is celebrated for its revolutionary composition and the realism of the apostles' expressions. However, the work is also the greatest testimony to Leonardo's experimental failure in terms of materials. By rejecting the traditional fresco method, painting on wet plaster, which required speed, Leonardo opted for the secco technique, using oil and tempera on a dry wall. This choice allowed him an unprecedented level of detail and the possibility of revising brushstrokes, but resulted in a work extremely vulnerable to humidity. Just 2 decades after its completion, the painting already showed severe signs of flaking, leading generations of restorers to attempt to preserve what remained of the original. The historical impact of the work, however, remained intact, influencing sacred art and the representation of linear perspective for centuries. With regard to the technical aspects of The Last Supper, the work was executed on a dry plaster wall using the secco technique. This type of support resulted in weak permanent adhesion of the pigments to the surface, compromising the durability of the painting. The binder employed by Leonardo consisted of an experimental mixture of tempera, oil, and beeswax, which gave the work extreme sensitivity to variations in humidity and temperature. In terms of perspective, the composition features a vanishing point centered on Christ's head, creating a profound sense of spatial depth and reinforcing the narrative focus of the scene. As a consequence of these technical choices, the state of conservation of the work became highly critical over the centuries, and it is now considered fragmented and heavily restored, with only about 20% of the original work still visible. Anatomy and the scientific method, the body as a machine. For Leonardo, knowledge of the external form of an object was impossible without understanding its internal structure. This led him to an obsessive dedication to human anatomy, carrying out the dissection of more than 30 corpses throughout his life. His anatomical studies represent one of the most brilliant facets of his genius, uniting scientific rigor with the artistic precision of drawing. Leonardo was a pioneer in the use of techniques such as injecting wax into the cerebral ventricles to study the shape of the brain, and in creating cross-sections and exploded views of bones and muscles. He corrected errors made by ancient anatomists, such as the representation of the vena cava and the position of the fetus in the uterus, and was one of the first to describe the heart as a muscle with 4 chambers. His drawings of the skull, which he poetically compared to the layers of an onion, demonstrate a search for the location of the soul and sensory processes. The Vitruvian Man and the Geometry of Life. In 1490, Leonardo created the Vitruvian Man, a drawing that synthesizes the harmony between the human microcosm and the universal macrocosm. Based on the proportions described by Vitruvius, the drawing places the human body within a circle and a square, symbolizing geometric perfection and the capacity for movement. Modern studies in surgical planning and design still use these proportions as references for the functionality and aesthetics of the human body. The aesthetics of ambiguity, MonaLisa, and painting techniques. Upon returning to Florence at the beginning of the 16th century, Leonardo began what would become the most famous painting in the world, the Mona Lisa, circa 1503 to 1517. In this work, he applied to perfection his 2 most innovative techniques, sfumato and chiaroscuro. Sfumato, from the Italian smoky, consists of the subtle gradation of tones and colors, eliminating sharp contour lines to create an effect of volume and atmospheric depth. The enigmatic smile of the model, mostly identified as Lisa del Giocondo, is the direct result of the application of sfumato at the corners of the lips and eyes, areas where the transition of shadow is so delicate that the expression seems to change according to the viewer's focus. Modern computational analyses suggest that the expression is predominantly happy, 83%, but contains traces of anguish and fear, reflecting the psychological complexity Leonardo sought to capture. In the painting of the Mona Lisa, Leonardo masterfully applied various techniques that contributed to its visual and psychological impact. Sfumato was used especially in the shadows around the eyes and mouth of the model, promoting extremely smooth transitions between light and shadow and resulting in the famous ambiguous smile. Chiaroscuro, in turn, appears in the contrast between the illuminated face of the figure and the darker background, providing tridimensionality and a sense of volume to the portrait. The pyramidal composition, structured from the crossed hands that form the base of the figure, ensures visual stability and directs the observer's attention to the face. Complementing these techniques, the atmospheric landscape in the background presents an uneven horizon and bluish tones, creating a strong sense of distance and reinforcing the symbolic connection between the human figure and nature. The codices, the repository of an infinite intellect. Most of Leonardo's scientific thought has survived through his notebooks or codices, which total more than 7,000 pages. These manuscripts cover an impressive range of topics, botany, hydrodynamics, geology, optics, and mechanics. Written in mirror writing, from right to left, the notebooks served as a private laboratory where he documented experiments, plans for inventions, and reflections on the nature of painting. One of the most notable examples is the Codex Leicester, acquired by Bill Gates in 1994 for $30.8 million. This document focuses on studies of hydrology, explaining the movement of water and erosion, as well as containing astronomical observations on moonlight. The Codex Atlanticus, the largest of all, preserves his projects for flying machines, bridges, and weaponry, highlighting his role as a precursor of modern technology. Leonardo da Vinci's intellectual legacy was also preserved through his codices, each with specific contents and currently under different custodianships. The Codex Atlanticus, the largest of all, gathers studies on engineering, weaponry, and flying machines, and is currently housed at the Biblioteca Ambrosiana in Milan. The Codex Leicester, focused mainly on hydraulics, geology, and astronomy, belongs to a private collection owned by Bill Gates. The Codex Arundel, preserved at the British Library in London, contains notes related to science and mathematics. Finally, the Codex Madrid, kept at the National Library of Spain, concentrates on studies related to mechanics and geometry, revealing the depth of Leonardo's technical thought. Personal life, ethics, and philosophy. Leonardo's personality was as fascinating as his work. Described as a man of extraordinary beauty, physical strength, and elegance, he was known for wearing short pink tunics at a time of sober dress. His personal ethics were deeply marked by respect for life. Leonardo was vegetarian or vegan, refusing to consume meat and preferring linen clothing so as not to use the skins of dead animals. Historical accounts mention that he frequently bought birds in markets solely to free them from their cages. His effective life was also the subject of analysis. Leonardo never married and maintained intense relationships with his assistants, notably Giacomo Caprati, Salai, and Francesco Melzi. While Salai was described as a problematic and kleptomaniac assistant, Melzi became his most faithful disciple, accompanying him until his death and inheriting most of his manuscripts, which allowed for the preservation of his intellectual legacy. Leonardo's sexuality, although lived discreetly, had moments of public exposure, such as the accusation of sodomy in 1476. Some specialists suggest that the trauma of this episode may have contributed to his tendency toward procrastination and to his detached view of the sexual act, which he described in his anatomical notes as something aesthetically unpleasant but necessary for the species. Twilight in France and artistic immortality. Leonardo's final years were spent under the protection of King Francis I of France, an ardent admirer who invited him to live at the chateau of Clauselus in 1516. As first painter, engineer, and architect of the king, he had no specific painting obligations, which allowed him to focus on organizing his notebooks and on architectural projects, such as the ideal city of Romorantin. Leonardo died on May 2, 1519, at the age of 67. His death marked the end of an era, but the beginning of a legend that grew exponentially in the centuries that followed, especially in the 19th century, when his scientific notebooks were systematically rediscovered and translated. Legacy in Brazil and the world. Leonardo da Vinci's presence in contemporary Brazilian culture is significant. Large-scale exhibitions such as the Worlds of Leonardo da Vinci and Leonardo da Vinci, 500 Years of a Genius, attracted hundreds of thousands of visitors in São Paulo. These exhibitions use immersive technology, map projections, and full-scale reproductions of his inventions to make the complexity of his visionary mind accessible. In the Brazilian context, Leonardo da Vinci's cultural impact can be observed in several major exhibitions. The Worlds of Leonardo da Vinci, held in São Paulo by Visual Farm, occupied an area of 3,000 square meters, featured 8 immersive rooms, and attracted approximately 100,000 visitors. The exhibition Leonardo da Vinci, 500 Years of a Genius, presented at MIS Experience, stood out for the display of physical models of his inventions and for detailed analyses of the Mona Lisa. The extraordinary universe of Leonardo da Vinci at the Memorial Minas Gerais focused primarily on his studies of anatomy and engineering, emphasizing the multidisciplinary character of his work. Leonardo's impact as a precursor of the scientific method is now recognized by the academic community. His insistence on empirical observation, what he called knowing how to see, formed the basis of modern experimental science. He saw no separation between the laws governing the fall of a drop of water and those governing the circulation of blood, anticipating concepts of systems theory and complexity. Leonardo da Vinci remains the ultimate symbol of the integration of the arts and sciences. His life demonstrates that creativity is not an isolated gift, but the result of disciplined curiosity applied to all fields of knowledge. His technical failures, such as the deterioration of the Last Supper, are outweighed by his intellectual success in mapping the workings of the universe. As the most curious man in history, Leonardo left a roadmap for critical thinking and innovation that continues to inspire artists, scientists, and engineers 5 centuries after his death. The relevance of his work lies not only in the aesthetic beauty of his paintings, but in the courage to question the visible world in order to discover the invisible laws that sustain it. Now let's hear a little more about 10 of the most famous works by the master Leonardo da Vinci, starting with the Mona Lisa, 1517. The Mona Lisa is widely regarded as the most famous painting in Western art and represents the culmination of Leonardo da Vinci's mastery of portraiture. The work is celebrated for its psychological depth, subtle realism, and technical innovation. Leonardo employed the sfumato technique to soften transitions between light and shadow, eliminating harsh outlines and creating a lifelike sense of volume. The subject's ambiguous smile, which appears to change depending on the viewer's perspective, reflects Leonardo's deep interest in human emotion and perception. The pyramidal composition lends stability to the figure, while the atmospheric background landscape, with its winding paths and distant horizons, suggests a symbolic connection between humanity and nature. Rather than presenting a static likeness, Leonardo captured a moment of inner life, making the portrait feel alive and timeless. The painting's enduring appeal lies in this fusion of artistic technique, scientific observation, and psychological insight, which continues to inspire artists, scholars, and audiences worldwide. Current location: on permanent display at the Louvre Museum. The Last Supper, 1498. The Last Supper stands as one of the most influential religious artworks ever created. Painted directly onto the wall of a Dominican monastery's refectory, the composition captures the dramatic moment when Christ announces that one of the apostles will betray him. Leonardo abandoned traditional static groupings and instead portrayed each apostle reacting with a distinct emotional response, creating a dynamic narrative scene. The use of linear perspective, with the vanishing point aligned precisely with Christ's head, reinforces both spatial depth and theological symbolism. Despite its artistic brilliance, the painting suffered severe deterioration due to Leonardo's experimental a secco technique, which lacked the durability of true fresco. Over centuries, numerous restorations have attempted to preserve what remains of the original work. Even in its fragile state, The Last Supper profoundly shaped the development of narrative composition, emotional expression, and perspective in Western art. Current location: Refectory of Santa Maria del Grazie. Original location: Vitruvian Man, 1490. The Vitruvian Man is one of Leonardo da Vinci's most iconic drawings and a powerful symbol of the Renaissance ideal of harmony between art and science. Based on the writings of the Roman architect Vitruvius, the drawing illustrates the mathematical proportions of the human body by placing a male figure within both a circle and a square. Leonardo's interpretation goes beyond simple illustration. It reflects his belief that the human body mirrors the order of the universe. Every measurement in the drawing corresponds to anatomical observations derived from direct study, demonstrating Leonardo's commitment to empirical accuracy. The work unites geometry, anatomy, philosophy, and aesthetics in a single image, embodying the Renaissance pursuit of universal knowledge. Though small in scale, the Vitruvian Man has had immense cultural influence, becoming a global symbol of balance, proportion, and human potential. Current location: held by the Gallery dell'Accademia, displayed only occasionally for conservation reasons. Lady with an Ermine, 1491. Lady with an Ermine is a refined portrait that demonstrates Leonardo's exceptional ability to convey movement and psychological presence. The subject, Cecilia Gallerani, is depicted in a three-quarter pose, turning slightly as if responding to something beyond the frame. This sense of motion was highly innovative for its time. The ermine she holds functions both as a symbol of purity and as a visual reference to her patron, Ludovico Sforza. Leonardo's precise rendering of textures, fur, skin, fabric, reveals his acute observational skills. The subtle modeling of light across the face reflects his growing mastery of sfumato, while the calm, yet alert expression suggests inner intelligence and individuality. Unlike many Renaissance portraits that emphasize status alone, this painting captures personality and psychological depth, marking a significant evolution in portrait art. Current location: on display at the Czartoryski Museum. The Annunciation, 1475. The Annunciation is one of Leonardo's earliest major paintings and already displays hallmarks of his emerging genius. The scene depicts the angel Gabriel announcing to Mary that she will bear the Son of God. While the composition follows traditional iconography, Leonardo infused it with naturalism and spatial coherence. The architectural setting demonstrates early experimentation with linear perspective, and the detailed botanical elements reflect his keen interest in nature. Mary's calm, thoughtful expression contrasts with earlier, more rigid depictions, signaling a shift towards psychological realism. The painting reveals Leonardo's transition from apprentice to independent master, as he begins to move beyond the stylistic conventions of his teacher's workshop. Although not as famous as his later works, The Annunciation provides crucial insight into the development of Leonardo's artistic language. Current location: on display at the Uffizi Gallery. The Adoration of the Magi, 1482, unfinished. Although unfinished, The Adoration of the Magi is considered one of Leonardo's most revolutionary compositions. The painting depicts the moment when the Magi present gifts to the infant Christ, surrounded by a complex arrangement of figures in motion. Instead of a calm, symmetrical scene, Leonardo created a swirling mass of gestures, expressions, and overlapping bodies, conveying intense emotional energy. The unfinished state reveals his working process, including underdrawings and compositional experiments. Architectural ruins and dynamic perspectives hint at themes of transformation and spiritual renewal. This work marks a decisive break from traditional Renaissance balance, emphasizing movement and psychological drama. Even incomplete, it influenced later artists by expanding the expressive possibilities of religious painting. Current location: on display at the Uffizi Gallery. Flying machine designs, late 15th century. Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine designs reflect his fascination with nature and his belief that human invention should follow natural laws. By studying birds and airflow, he developed concepts such as ornithopters and the aerial screw, an early precursor to the helicopter. These designs reveal a sophisticated understanding of lift, balance, and motion, even though the technology of the time could not support actual flight. Leonardo approached aviation not as fantasy, but as a mechanical problem to be solved through observation and experimentation. His drawings combine artistic clarity with engineering logic, illustrating components, forces, and movement. Although never realized in his lifetime, these designs laid conceptual foundations for modern aeronautics and remain among his most visionary achievements. Current location: original drawings preserved in the Biblioteca Ambrosiana, replicas displayed in science museums worldwide. Armored tank design, circa 1487. Leonardo's armored tank design represents his innovative approach to military engineering. Conceived as a circular vehicle with slanted armor and multiple cannons, it was intended to provide mobile protection and overwhelming firepower on the battlefield. The design demonstrates Leonardo's understanding of geometry, mechanics, and intimidation psychology. However, the tank was never built, partly due to mechanical flaws and technological limitations. Some scholars believe Leonardo may have intentionally included design errors to prevent misuse. Regardless, the concept anticipates modern armored warfare and highlights Leonardo's ability to envision future technologies. The drawing exemplifies his willingness to explore even destructive applications of science while maintaining intellectual control over their execution. Current location: original drawings housed in the Biblioteca Ambrosiana, reconstructions shown in select museums. Anatomical drawings, 1513. Leonardo's anatomical drawings are among the most accurate and insightful studies of the human body produced before modern medicine. Based on direct dissections, his illustrations depict muscles, bones, organs, and vascular systems with remarkable precision. Leonardo treated the body as a mechanical system, analyzing how structure enables movement and function. His drawings combine scientific rigor with artistic clarity, making complex anatomy understandable through visual representation. Although unpublished during his lifetime, these studies anticipated later medical discoveries and set a standard for anatomical illustration. They reveal Leonardo's belief that true knowledge arises from first-hand observation rather than inherited authority. Current location: primarily preserved in the Royal Collection, with rotating public exhibitions. Codex Atlanticus, late 15th, early 16th century. The Codex Atlanticus is the largest collection of Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks and offers unparalleled insight into his mind. Containing studies on engineering, flight, hydraulics, architecture, and weaponry, the Codex reveals how Leonardo used drawing as a tool for thinking. Each page blends text and image, showing ideas in motion rather than final conclusions. The Codex demonstrates Leonardo's interdisciplinary approach, where art, science, and technology coexist without boundaries. It stands as a testament to his insatiable curiosity and intellectual breadth, preserving concepts that would only become practical centuries later. Current location: preserved and partially exhibited at the Biblioteca Ambrosiana. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos about the lives of great artists and historical figures. And if you'd like to explore Dali's world even further, check the video description for books, prints, and products inspired by his work.